NieR is a series I've wanted to talk about on this channel for a fairly long time now, as it's an absolutely fascinating one in my opinion, and I can't wait to do so today. Before I can, however, I want to warn you that there will be gigantic spoilers for both NieR Replicant and NieR Automata. I really recommend playing these games if you haven't already, because they are, for me, alongside Xenoblade, the pinnacle of video game storytelling, and you're seriously missing out if you don't look into them in my opinion. If you've already played the games, or simply don't care, then welcome, let's begin. What I find the most engaging about it, and what draws me the most to NieR as a series, is its willingness to ask its audience some genuinely thought-provoking, and sometimes even uncomfortable questions that dive deep into philosophical topics like the nature of humanity and the like. It can, at times, come across as just trying to be quirky, and yeah, that is certainly somewhat the case. I mean, hell, this is the game where most of the bosses are named after famous philosophers. How quirky can you get? But I think it gives the series a certain charm that you don't get with many others. It is one of those game series that has a seemingly limitless degree of depth for random weirdos who obsess over this stuff, like me, to overanalyze on the internet for your viewing pleasure. Seriously though, this series goes to some really weird and sometimes frankly disturbing places, which is another thing I really appreciate about NieR, its willingness to be dark, and I mean dark. These games, at least when you fully understand the intricacies and many different layers of their stories, are depressing as all hell. The first game, Replicant, literally ends with you being responsible for the slow, unavoidable extinction of the entire human race for Christ's sake, other than our beloved skeleton boy, of course. But I don't think this series is being dark or quirky for the sake of it. I think NieR wants to start a game external narrative, a philosophical debate, with the questions and answers within the game merely acting as a sort of springboard for players to bounce their own ideas off of. In this way, it also has a degree of interactivity that, again, makes NieR all the more distinct from much else in the gaming industry. Today, I want to continue that narrative and do my own part in discussing NieR for myself, and the philosophical questions I believe it wants us to consider in our own lives. Personally, I believe that each game is interested in one overarching philosophical question, but of course there is a certain degree of overlap, and all of which I will explain in greater detail later on. For Replicant, the question is what does it mean to be human, and what is the nature of consciousness, whereas for Automata, it is the broader, more metaphorical question of how do we give meaning to our lives. I wanted to make this video to express my love for the series as, although I do have problems with the games, most notably the absolutely ludicrous replay system, especially in Replicant, they really are something special in my opinion. NieR Replicant has one of, if not my favourite individual opening scenes of any game ever made. Take this in for a second. You've just purchased this game, a seemingly standard fantasy adventure set in a colourful world with an optimistic, innocent young protagonist, and this is the very first thing you see, and hear for that matter. It's haunting, but in all the right ways. From its very first frame, Replicant is trying to tell you that something is not right in this world. If the bizarre, creepy, glitched-looking monsters that soon attack you and your sickly sister Yona weren't enough of a direct giveaway of this, the simply harrowing track playing in the background, titled Snow in Summer, lets you know right away what sort of game this is and what sort of story it is setting itself up to be. Eventually, after an admittedly frustrating and forced 2 replays later, and in my case spending hours scrolling through the wiki because this shit is confusing and I still don't think I entirely understand it, almost all of the secrets of this world have been revealed and its questions answered. But I find that the answers given just lead to more indirect philosophical questions. You learn that the monsters seen at the beginning, known by many as shades, are in reality what are known as gestalts. Warped, broken versions of human souls themselves. Humanity was fighting a losing battle against a terrifying, fatal illness known as the White Chlorination Syndrome, and eventually concocted a plan whereby all humans would have their souls separated from their bodies, so that even if their bodies became destroyed by the disease, which turns people into salt, there was still a chance for that person to survive. In the meantime, exact physical duplicates that lacked consciousness, empty shells if you will, named replicants, would be fashioned based on the genetic data of everyone's corresponding gestalt. The plan was to wait until the disease had naturally faded away, and then recombine body and soul, or replicant and gestalt. However, as seen in the game's opening, something went wrong with this plan. The gestaltification process, as it was known, which removed the soul from a body, would always fail due to the gestalt's instability. This is known as the relapse phenomenon. So the overseers of the project, which was named Project Gestalt fittingly, sought out an individual who could undergo the gestaltification process without relapsing, simply by chance due to a genetic or biological mutation, as they could then, theoretically, use the genetic data of that person as a way to ensure that other gestalts didn't relapse. And eventually they found him. That was the child in the intro, who would come to be known as the Shadow Lord, which is cheesy, I know. Things went well for a while afterwards. Everyone's gestalt was given a sort of energy extracted from the Shadow Lord to prevent relapse from occurring. However, more issues kept coming. The primary one was that replicants began developing their own sentience independent of their corresponding gestalts. This, along with the fact that the Shadow Lord himself had a genetic instability within him, was the cause of additional relapses later down the line. And with that absolute clusterfuck of lore out of the way, that's pretty much everything you need to know for this section. Now, let's get down to discussing what philosophical relevance any of this has. I think the main question players may find themselves asking is the following: are the replicants human? I think few would be in disagreement that the gestalts, despite their monstrous appearance and sometimes aggressive nature, are, or at least used to be human. The second replay, in which we get to hear the anguished cries and pleas for help from the various shades we brutally murder, makes this painfully clear. So it seems that what determines someone's humanity, therefore, is whether or not consciousness or sentience is present. This is why we may, at first, in terms of a timeline on a linear scale, be obliged to argue replicants are not human. Despite being perfect physical duplicates of humans, they lack their consciousness. That is how they were designed, after all. What's interesting, though, is the fact that the replicants inevitably develop their own consciousness. Have they now become human? If so, does it mean their gestalts are any less human? They possess just the human soul, after all, whereas their replicants now possess both soul and body, even if it's not their original consciousness. And why did this happen in the first place? I'm going to go on a little tangent here to discuss what this all means from a metaphysical perspective, from the lens of the philosophy of mind. Within the metaphysics of mind area of philosophy, there are two main directly opposed viewpoints. Dualism, which argues that mind and body are entirely separate entities and can be divided. The mind is non-physical, while the body is physical. And physicalism, which argues that the mind is ultimately physical in nature, and thus is just part of the body. Of course, though, much of this is a gross oversimplification, so keep that in mind. What's so interesting about NieR Replicant is that it can be seen as supporting both views, despite the fact they seem completely contradictory on first glance. The very fact that mind or soul and body are separable in this universe, as this was the core idea the plan to beat White Chlorination Syndrome was built upon, lends itself to a dualist viewpoint. If they were one and the same, gestalts couldn't exist at all. However, it's also physicalist in that the replicants, despite originally lacking any sentience whatsoever, were able to nonetheless develop their own sentience. This suggests that consciousness is just something to do with the way the physical body functions, and as such, it's an inevitability that a physical duplicate of a person, even if they are specifically designed to be empty shells, like replicants in NieR, will eventually develop said sentience for themselves. To be totally honest, I'm not sure if any of this is relevant to the main question of what it means to be human, but I wanted to put that A-level philosophy knowledge to use somehow. This feels more like it is concerning the question of what are NieR Replicant's views on the nature of consciousness, which I guess is also related to the question of what it means to be human. Throughout all of this, one can't help but feel dreadfully sorry for the gestalts, or shades. They've been ripped from their original bodies that were rightfully theirs, and now replaced, told they are monsters with no place in this world by their very own rightful bodies, despite the fact this world was theirs in the first place. And the game wants you to feel this way too. Despite my issues with the replay mechanic, what I love about the fact that you are encouraged to replay the game a second time at least is that, with the added knowledge that insane gut-punching plot twist gave you the last time around, you now become aware of how twisted and devastating your actions truly are, and the damage you are inflicting on humanity. And to make it even worse, as I mentioned earlier, there are new voice lines spoken by the various shade bosses that you couldn't hear on your previous playthrough. You soon learn that you have been mercilessly killing completely innocent people, even children in some cases. It's sickening and it's twisted, and it just goes to show how powerful perspective is, despite being, depending on how you look at it, the most human entities of all in this world. The shades are, with us gleefully, ignorantly partaking in it ourselves, abused, neglected, demonized, and even massacred in droves. Perhaps this is a comment on how easily we can lose our own humanity when faced with something unfamiliar, something alien, and how important appearance truly is. It works in much the same way it often does in our own world. The fear of foreign, mysterious peoples we do not understand has been the catalyst for many conflicts, which I feel I don't even need to, nor want to name. It reflects the underlying fear of the other within all of us. So, is what it means to be human to hate, and to fear, and to bury your head in the sand and ignore the truth that is right in front of you, and has been there the whole time, as reflected by some of the lyrics of the game's final track, the beautiful vocal song Ashes of Dreams. Perhaps, but that is a very one-sided viewpoint, and I think the one this game wants to give us is far more multifaceted. Perhaps, on the complete other side of the equation, what it means to be human is to love and care for others, and no character exemplifies this more in Replicant than, perhaps surprisingly, its main antagonist, the Shadow Lord. What I love about this character is how subversive he is. Everything from his design to his cheesy ass name, because this is something I would have come up with at 9 years old, let's be honest, is setting him up to be a one-dimensional, bog-standard villain who wants to destroy the world because he feels like it and he's evil. But, in reality, this couldn't be further from the truth. The Shadow Lord is probably the game's most tragic character, although Kaine and Emil certainly come close, and maybe even its kindest. He doesn't want to destroy the world. He wants to put the fragmented pieces of his Yona, his sister, back together. The only reason he agreed to become the Shadow Lord, also known as the original Gestalt, and be experimented on, treated as a lab rat in the first place, was because he was promised that, in doing so, his sister Yona, who was relapsing at the time, could be saved. But the overseers of this project, the twin android units Devil and Popular, kept giving him false hope. False deadlines for when this could happen and when the project could be safely officially concluded. So, fed up with the world, he takes matters into his own hands and seizes Yona's replicant for himself, seeking to implant her Gestalt, his version of Yona, back within that vessel. He did all of this for the person he loved most in the world, and who loved him the most too. And can we blame him? Only for her to immediately sacrifice herself as she didn't believe the body to be rightfully hers, with another consciousness residing within her, our Yona, and then it gets even worse when he's cut down by his own replicant, the protagonist, you. Cheesy as it sounds, it's almost as if the two facets of humanity, love, represented by the Shadow Lord ironically, in his desire to restore his own Yona and make her well again, and hatred, represented by the protagonist, driven mad with rage towards the Shades after they took his Yona, have come face to face with one another, with these also being represented by the literal two components of a human, at least in NieR's eyes, the body and the soul. And, to make it even more symbolic, these two pieces are the two sides of the same human. The soul has destroyed the body, hatred has destroyed love, as it so often does, but it has also in the process destroyed itself. You see, all replicants depend upon their gestalts, and should they relapse or be killed, their corresponding replicant will soon get an ailment known as the Black Scrawl and die. And, on the next level, all gestalts depend upon the Shadow Lord to not relapse. So, with his death, not only will our protagonist die, with his gestalt having been killed, but every other human, their gestalt and replicant, is doomed to slowly but surely fade away from the world. Maybe the comment being made here is that, in destroying something so profoundly significant like the protagonist did, you lose your humanity. Literally. Humanity has literally or will soon become extinct because of his actions, after all. So, what does this all mean? Personally, I don't think Taro is trying to give us any one singular answer. It is up to us whether to decide if replicants or gestalts have more of a claim to humanity than the other, and which side better demonstrates what exactly humanity is and represents. Is it to hate and fear the other, that which we do not understand, represented by the replicants, or to love and care for others, represented, perhaps surprisingly, by the gestalts, and specifically the Shadow Lord? Or perhaps it is a bit of both. The answer you choose is your own. I find it ironic that Automata, the game all about robots and artificial intelligence, isn't, in my opinion, the game that is most interested in questioning what it means to be human. While, yes, these questions are certainly raised, the game never seems to deny that the androids or machines possess humanity or sentience. Even when our characters themselves are questioning whether they actually do, it is always incredibly obvious that the answer is yes based on their behaviour. So, while the first and second playthroughs do ask these questions, focusing particularly on the machines and whether or not they have feelings, emotions, etc., so your fairly typical questions revolving around artificial intelligence, I believe they are used as a sort of cover to obscure the main philosophical question the game is really trying to ask, and which is finally revealed and the answer to explored in its third and final playthrough. How do we give meaning to our lives? The world of Automata is, like Replicant, a strange and complex one, so bear with me here while I lay out some of the groundwork. Essentially, human-made androids are, and have been for hundreds if not thousands of years, in conflict with alien-made machines. You are told that the humans have escaped to the moon, and you play as one of the Yorha androids, 2B and eventually 9S and A2, who have been sent down to Earth from the space bunker to clear the planet of machines and hopefully make it habitable for humanity once again. Pretty bog standard stuff, right? However, as is often the case with NieR, nothing is as simple as it may seem. As the game progresses, and especially near its finale, a series of hard-hitting revelations occur that continually strip away any of the meaning this world seemed to have had previously, and leave you asking simply, what's the point? Little by little, they whittle down the significance of practically every event that's happened, leaving you with nothing more than meaninglessness itself. You learn that the alien race that had made the machines is long since extinct, having been defeated by their creations themselves. What's more, humanity is also extinct, with the cause of this playing out in NieR Replicant. So you're left with a very interesting scenario in which two artificial organisations, the androids and the machines, are left to forge their own meaning, as their creators aren't there to give it to them, and the way they do this is very different across the two sides. The aliens' machines, after defeating their creators a millennia ago, were left with one lone directive by them: fight and eliminate the enemy. And so they arrived on Earth and started fighting with its native android population. However, they soon realised something. If they were to continue utilising their entire military arsenal, as they had been doing, they would easily destroy all of the androids in no time. After all, they vastly outnumbered them and were far more powerful than them too. However, in doing so, and destroying the androids completely, they would also rob themselves of their purpose. There would no longer be any enemies left to fight. Their lives would have no meaning. This is the problem for the machines, and it's also why the war has seemed to be stuck on a stalemate for so long. The machines want it to be, and they don't want it to end. They purposefully don't use the full extent of their destructive capabilities, but intentionally limit it so some amount of androids will always remain that they can be in conflict with. On top of this, though, the machine network, which manifests itself as a duo of red girls, for some reason, had a wider-reaching purpose, to break out of their programming that demanded they fight, and, in doing so, evolve, to make their own meaning that was independent of the one left to them by their late creators. To do this, certain groups of machines were disconnected from the network, as a sort of experiment to see how they would make their own meaning when they weren't simply meant to fight. Fascinatingly, they seek to emulate humanity, mimicking social constructs such as hierarchy, religion, beauty, family, and so on. A key example of this can be seen in the form of Pascal and his village. This is a sect of machines who have chosen, independently of any orders, to forge meaning through living peaceful, modest lives. Pascal is the leader of this tight-knit community and is genuinely just one of the sweetest characters in the game. It's very on the nose, but I love how he spends much of his time reading philosophy. It's just fucking brilliant. Anyway, what's important about Pascal is he represents what can happen to someone, machine or human, when their life's meaning is taken away from them. Pascal was a pacifist, and more important to him than anything else were the village children. When a mysterious virus takes hold of some of the village machines and they begin cannibalizing one another, he hides them away in an abandoned factory. A vast armada of machines arrive, and he, with our help, is able to successfully fight them off. However, the scene when he arrives back inside the room where the children were hiding is a ghastly one. They have all committed suicide. Pascal places this down to the fact that he taught them the concept of fear, but he didn't teach them its limits or the fact that too much fear could be dangerous, so he blames himself. With his meaning gone, he is so unable to cope that he asks you, the player, who is A2 in this instance, to either wipe his memory or kill him. Needless to say, neither option is desirable. It leaves us questioning if whatever purpose we seek shouldn't be so finite or fragile, as machines themselves are. Similarly, another sect of machines disconnected from the network are the Forest Kingdom's Knights. They are emulating the human concept of hierarchy and dynasty, and swear allegiance to a baby machine after the original is destroyed, never comprehending its utter inability to grow. Eventually, A2, one of the Yorha androids, arrives and kills their leader, leaving these machines too without meaning to their lives. What do they do now? Another example of network disconnected machines seeking their own meaning through the emulation of human concepts is the amusement park's machines, and specifically Simone. This time it is beauty. Longing for the attention of another machine, she seeks to beautify herself through the cannibalizing of other machines, using the mangled remnants of their parts to adorn herself, lacking the intuition that said actions are immoral. It's almost like all these machines are lacking some logical impulse that would tell them the meaning they have chosen isn't quite completely coherent, as they aren't completely human. But at least they are able to forge a purpose independently of their creators at all. Some aren't so lucky. Other than Pascal and some other cases, the main example of what happens when one is unable to cope with a lack of meaning is the Yorha androids themselves, who form the other key half of this conflict. As mentioned earlier, it is not just the machines' creators that are long extinct, but the androids too, humans. However, unlike the machines, who still possess some degree of a purpose in the form of the machine network's order to evolve, the androids were utterly incapable of forming a purpose independently of their creators. After all, what reason would they have to protect the planet if there was nobody left to go back for it? Due to this, android morale was at an all-time low. But certain androids came up with a plan to introduce meaning back into their lives, and incentivize them once more to fight the machines and retake Earth. And the only way they could do this was to lie, to spread the false narrative that humans never went extinct at all, and had simply fled to the moon, to fashion a false god they would gladly die for. This was the true aim of Project Yorha. Because of this, the androids' meaning for living is utterly dependent on humanity, so when they discover the truth, expectedly, they are simply left wondering what the point is. 9S, one of the main characters in the game, is an example of a Yorha android who has learned this terrible truth, and it drives him completely insane. This knowledge, alongside the discovery that the woman he loved, another android named 2B, was specially designed to execute his unit whenever he discovered said truth over and over again, causes a complete 180 for his character. Gone is the inquisitive, chipper, good-natured person he used to be, and the one he has become is unrecognizable. He slays machines without mercy, even after learning more truths that rip away even more meaning from his existence, like the fact that said machines are fundamentally the same as the Yorha androids. Both have the exact same black box at their core, meaning their consciousness's structure is identical, so he has essentially been killing the exact same being as himself, and he loses all reason whatsoever. A scene I find particularly telling of this is right at the game's end, before he fights with A2. He pulls out his sword to battle her, despite his heavily wounded state, and his pod warns him not to, telling him this would be irrational. His response?
Proposal. Cease combat. Fighting her at this point would be
Pod
irrational.
153. I order you to halt all logical thought and speech.
He knows it's irrational, and he knows he isn't fit to fight, and in doing so, will likely die. But at this point, he doesn't care anymore. He doesn't have any justification to continue living in such a very meaningless world. So, what is the point of all of this? Again, like with Replicant, I don't think there is a clear singular answer. Perhaps we should form a meaning for our own lives independently of what is asked of us by another, as the machines do, and not be overly dependent on said meaning givers like the androids are. This is dangerous, as if the meaning givers are to cease to exist, you are left with nothing to drive you, and the disastrous effects this can have are seen very clearly in the numerous above examples. I think the main message here is that what that meaning ultimately ends up being is up to you, whether it is acting as a lone pacifist in a world enveloped by conflict, swearing loyalty to a baby king who will never grow, or fighting a pointless battle for idols who do not exist. There is no one right choice. The very fact that Automata seems to strip away any meaning from its world almost allows you, as an audience, to use that absence of meaning as a blank canvas to create your own purpose, again encouraging audience interactivity in a really unique and interesting way. Well, that was cheery. I hope this video has been entertaining and thought-provoking beyond just needlessly depressing. It was great to finally have a chance to talk about one of my favourite series, so I hope I did it justice. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!